Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October session of the Marxism and Disability Network. It is lovely to see you all here, just as leaves are falling from the trees, and we're all having a very large and very existential moment about quite how much our heating bills are going to go up by. But if you can drag your attention away from that for just one evening, we have a wonderful presentation lined up for you today. Barbara Neukirchinger, and I hope I got the CH sound right, will be giving a presentation on new perspectives on the materialist legacy of the social model. Barbara's is a name that has been coming up, I think, for the last few years that I have been interested in disability research, and has been one of the more, shall we say, materialist and sensible voices on a number of research questions. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her analysis of and evaluation of the theoretical model and theoretical framework, which I know many of us in this room use on a daily basis. So with no further ado, Barbara, I'll hand it over to you. And thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thank you very much as well. So, dear all, welcome and thank you very much for coming to my presentation today. The presentation has the title New Perspectives on the Materialist Legacy of the Social Model and introduces a discussion of potential new impulses to the social model of disability. To give a better understanding of the context of this presentation, I want to tell a bit about my personal and academic background. First of all, the presentation is based on my PhD in social theory that I completed last year at Bangor University in Wales. The starting point of my interest in this topic was a conference about universal design at the Center for Disability Studies in Hamburg, Germany. I critically discussed the implementation of diversity management at universities, but other researchers also talked about the benefits of the Frankfurt School's critical theory for disability studies, among other things. This experience prompted me to examine different theoretical strands more closely. In the end, these reflections laid the groundwork of my PhD research on a discussion of gender and disability from a British social model perspective under the lens of the theoretical approaches of, broadly speaking, critical theory, postmodernism, and intersectionality or philosophy of science. As a disclaimer, when I mention critical theory, I usually refer to the Frankfurt School's critical theory in this context, just to avoid any confusion with other meanings of this term. The presentation I'm holding today will introduce some of the findings and will discuss the Marxist elements, especially the ones underpinning critical theory, but also, to a lesser degree, Donna Haraway's approach to feminism and knowledge production. Now I want to introduce you to the starting points for the discussion of the research question. First, I want to talk to you about the main reference points of the British social model of disability to provide context for further discussion. The fundamental principles of disability are an important milestone for the disability movement. The Union of the Physically Impaired Against Segregation, UPIAS, formulated this document in 1976. The key argument was that the imposition of social barriers, meaning external barriers from society, on top of impairments, created the main cause of exclusion from participation in society. The so-called predominant contemporary social organization was structured in a way that rendered disabled people an oppressed group. This shifted the focus away from disability as an individual problem to disability as a systemic or structural issue. Therefore, UPIAS advocated for a politically motivated separation between disability and impairment. The formulation of the fundamental principles was followed by the academic development of the British social model of disability. Mike Oliver coined the term in 1983 in his publications. There was also a strong influence of materialist approaches to the social model at the time, namely by disability activists and academics like Colin Barnes, Vic Finkelstein, or Mike Oliver himself. Vic Finkelstein was also very influential because he developed a three-phase model, which was based on historical materialism. In this model, he laid out how attitudes towards disability were historically formed and also how this development would eventually lead to a liberated society by historical laws after overcoming negative attitudes. So these were some ideas that were influential in the context of the social model. However, despite the empowerment that the social model provided to the disability movement, it also faced some criticism from disability activists and scholars. Postmodern-related critique claimed that it neglected the experiences of diverse and different lived realities, which would simplify disabled people's lives. Additionally, the propagation of a positive identity was not allowed to deal with negative aspects of impairment. Another critique was that the point that the social model separated impairment from disability as a purely medical aspect. Another critique was that the point that the social model separated impairment from disability as a purely medical aspect. This would conceal the fact that the understanding of impairment, just like disability, was a social construct. And overall, there was a dismissal of Marxist approaches to the social model because of the assumed claims to absoluteness of Marxist theory. This was something that postmodern thought questioned and rejected. Apart from postmodern responses to the social model, there were also other feminist academic critiques. Feminist voices pointed to the focus on the social model on the issues of white, male, and physically disabled men, which would ignore gender-related problems with disability and not to the experiences of disabled women justice. Then there was also an academic critique that felt that the social model was under-theorized. And this is a bit of a tricky point because the social model was never meant to be a fully fleshed theory. It was mainly supposed to be a model that simply demonstrates mechanisms of exclusion. That's why this critique is often dismissed as missing the point. To address the different criticisms, I discussed the Frankfurt School's critical theory, Foucault's concept of biopower, and Donna Haraway's cyborg feminism. But today, and in the context of this series, I want to focus on the Marxist aspects. This brings me to the next part of my presentation, the significance of critical theory and why I am talking about it in a lecture about Marxism and disability. So first of all, for a better understanding of the context that shaped critical theory, I want to provide a short overview of the history of the Frankfurt School, especially the early years during the Adorno and Horkheimer era. Originally, the Institute of Social Research, where critical theory was developed, was founded in Frankfurt in 1923. The focus at the time was on researching the history of Marxism and contemporary political economic research in the spirit of Marxism. The social philosopher Max Horkheimer took over as a director in 1930. His directorship moved the focus from historical research to the investigation of current social developments. It also stressed the interdisciplinary collaboration between individual disciplines, for example, sociology, psychology, political economy, literature studies, fine arts, and history. Furthermore, the perspective of materialism formed the foundation for further research. But when the National Socialist Party took over the government in 1933, the institute fled from prosecution in Nazi Germany to continue work at Columbia University in the US. Several reasons led to this development. On the one hand, when the Nazis seized power, intellectuals critical of their regime were persecuted or replaced in academic positions. On the other hand, the members of the inner circle of the institute were predominantly Jewish, without to lead to the persecution and exclusion from public life under the reign of the National Socialist Party. Eventually, the institute was able to return to and reopen in Frankfurt in the 1950s amid the politically tense climate of the post-war era and the beginning of the Cold War. Mostly, this was because most members were unable to secure permanent positions in US academia, but also because they felt more comfortable working in their native language. Now I want to explore in more depth what critical theory is about. An important milestone for its origin is Max Horkheimer's groundbreaking essay, Traditional and Critical Theory, which was published in 1937. It formulated principles that became essential for understanding what critical theory was supposed to mean. Fundamentally, it meant the rejection of traditional approaches to theory and science, which formed the basic for scientific work. Critical theory should question alleged certainties. The initial consideration was the question of why scientific progress and the dominance of reason, since the Enlightenment had not led to a more progressive and just society. Which conclusions did Horkheimer draw from this? It meant a rejection of scientific positivism and its narrow focus on methodology and mere fact-finding. His critique was also based on a Marxist materialist understanding. He believed underlying economic structures were constitutive of class relations and society as a whole. He diagnosed academia with a lack of awareness of science's entrenchment in society as well as of the external influences or practical interests that played into the way science was being practiced and developed. And he meant this especially in the form of the capitalist commodity economy. And to further illustrate what he means by that, I want to present you a quote taken from the essay. So I quote, "Critical theory does not have one doctrinal substance today, another tomorrow. The changes in it do not mean a shift to a wholly new outlook, as long as the age itself does not radically change. The stability of the theory is due to the fact that amid all change in society, the basic economic structure, the class relationship in its simplest form, and therefore the idea of the supersession of these two remain identical. The decisive substantive elements in the theory are conditioned by these unchanging factors, and they themselves therefore cannot change until there has been a historical transformation of society." It follows from this analysis that critical theory deals extensively with the reification of social relations and the intertwining of rationalism and economization. The reification of social relations is presented as a consequence of this entanglement that continues to shape all aspects of life. The original progressive promise of enlightened rationalism has been undermined through the appropriation by demands of the capitalist order of society. This realization prompted them to write the book Dialectic of Enlightenment, where they described the Enlightenment and its consequences for society as a failed project. What happened in their view was that the dominance of rationalism and formal logic that they observed had a detrimental effect on our way of thinking. It had adopted a narrow view of concepts of things as mere representations and exemplifications under standardized, predetermined categories. To them, this had become the nature of thinking and of looking at things, and, as a consequence, it ignored or blocked out everything that did not fit into this order. The problem with this was that it prevented us from trying to fully understand the nature of a thing with all its inconsistencies. They also complained that this has led to a situation where calculability, standardization, and functionality had become the norm. Their verdict was that the Enlightenment had turned totalitarian because rationalism as a principle permeated all areas of society and made deviance, for example in the form of disability, suspicious. I want to present another quote to show how their analysis of the effect the Enlightenment has on society is connected with a Marxist understanding of economization and alienation. In the bourgeois economy, the social work of each individual is mediated by the principle of the self. But the more heavily the process of self-preservation is based on the bourgeois division of labor, the more it enforces the self-alienation of individuals, who must mold themselves to the technical apparatus, body and soul. The technical process to which the subject has been reified after the eradication of the process from the consciousness is as free from the ambiguous meanings of mystical thought as from meaning altogether, since reason itself has become merely an aid to the all-encompassing economic apparatus. The multiplicity of forms is reduced to position and arrangement, history to fact, things to matter. The principle of immanence, the explanation of every event as repetition, which enlightenment upholds against mystical imagination, is that of myth itself. So, what has all of this to do with disability? Within this context, disability can be seen as a deviance from normalizing categories and repetition that, for example, able-bodiedness represents. This is not just because disability does not adhere to demands of efficiency and exploitability and, therefore, is an alleged deviance, but also because the embodiments of disability are wide-ranging, individual, and ambiguous themselves. Its diverse social and gender-specific locations are at the same time intersectional. For this reason, Adorno's concept of non-identity seems to be a good starting point to describe disability under capitalist socio-economic conditions. Adorno developed the concept of non-identity to describe remainders and contradictions between identitarian concepts and the things they tried to define. His idealized version of utopia would be above identity and above contradiction. It would be a togetherness of diversity. So that means uniformity is suspicious, and he seeks a utopia that goes beyond these categories. In terms of disability, this means that in a society where functionality is the norm, disability signifies non-identity. It stands for the existing remainder that cannot be reconciled with identitarian definitions because impairments exist beyond the formation of an economic, social, or scientific apparatus or a specific mode of production. At this point, I would like to make an excursus to the discussion of the Odyssey myth from Greek mythology in a dialectic of enlightenment, because it is exemplary for the key points I have mentioned before, and it is a centerpiece in this book. And that's also why you could call the theme of the section Odysseus and the Oathman, the disabling nature of enlightened capitalism. But beforehand, I want to provide a summary of what the Odyssey is about. Odysseus, king of the Greek island Ithaca, and his men have to find their way back home to Ithaca after the Trojan War. They face encounters with various mythical creatures during the journey. One of the main reference points is Odysseus sailing past the island of the Sirens. The Siren song is considered as especially dangerous because it is said to be so irresistibly seductive that passing seamen are inevitably drawn to its magical attraction, only to then shipwreck on a rocky island. Odysseus, warned by the sorceress Circe about the potentially deadly encounter with the Sirens, orders his men to plug their ears with beeswax to be immune against the Sirens' manipulation. But this will make them also immune to their master's commands. As Odysseus himself is tempted to listen to the infamous Siren song, he orders his men to bind him to the mast while the ship passes the Sirens' island. In this way, Odysseus can satisfy his curiosity without being lured into the Sirens' trap or, as a forecast of the self-disciplined, civilized bourgeois citizen, not to succumb to them even while he succumbs. So what is the point of the story in the context of critical theory? It highlights the dominance of functionality and efficiency because the oarsmen had to disable themselves to fulfill their duty to their master. The hearing was impaired in a way that they could continue their labor without distraction or disruption, and, unlike their master, they were not allowed to listen to their siren song. It is also a testament to the disabling effects of alienation, because their labor was reduced to mere function without any connection to it. In this context, the oarsman's role is identical with the compulsion to functionality. But everything that cannot be subordinated to the principle of functionality is non-identical to this principle. Non-identity is an ineluctable and inconsistent remainder and provides potential for friction. Disabled people in this respect are the remainder that creates contradiction and friction to stale definitions. It cannot be subordinated to capitalist principles of utilization as easily as the temporarily impaired sailors, and therefore disclose contradictions in this order. But I also want to mention that disability itself is not a rigid concept either, and is in constant flux with functionality and able-bodiedness. So there's a part of non-identity within the concept of disability as well. At the end of this excursus, I want to point out that there is also a problematic use of gender and disability in the way it is discussed in the dialectic of enlightenment. Unfortunately, disability also serves here as a negative foil for the social consequences of bourgeois enlightenment. The sirens themselves fulfill negatively connoted stereotypes about the female seductress who lures men into their misfortune. Despite all the reflection critical theory demands, the terms and images used here are not scrutinized further, and the negative connotations are thus reproduced. This leads me to the next part, Donna Haraway's cyborg feminism, and what it can add to the discussion. But first, I want to give some biographical background to her as well. Donna Haraway was born in 1944 in Denver, Colorado. She studied zoology and philosophy and received a PhD in biology at Yale University. But her work has always had an interdisciplinary approach, and she became known for her contributions to the fields of science and technology studies, feminist theory, and animal studies. She joined the History of Consciousness program at University of California, Santa Cruz in 1980, and was a professor at UC Santa Cruz since 1991. Currently, she is a distinguished emerita in the History of Consciousness department. Her most influential work is A Cyborg Manifesto, Science, Technology, and Socialist Feminism in the late 20th century, which was originally published in 1985. This document is also an important basis for my work. In this essay, Haraway uses the concept of the cyborg to question rigid boundaries, especially those created to separate human from animal and human from machine. The discussion shakes up notions of traditional feminism that are defined by identity politics and instead advocates for coalitions through affinity. The intention is to put into question the legitimacy of imposed identities and to highlight their limitations. Now I want to delve into a discussion of why Haraway's work is important here. As we have seen, critical theory provided some vital insights, but was not equipped to deal with gender-related aspects. That's what drew me to Donna Haraway's thinking. Her theorization was defined by the striving for diversity and the questioning of identity thinking that opened up connections to the school of thought of critical theory. Below, I want to introduce a quote from a text, a manifesto for cyborgs, that illustrates her programmatic stance. The theoretical, so quote, the theoretical and practical struggle against unity through domination or unity through incorporation, ironically, not only undermines the justifications for patriarchy, colonialism, humanism, positivism, essentialism, scientism, and other unlamented isms, but all claims for an organic or natural standpoint. I think that radical and socialist or Marxist feminisms have also undermined their or our epistemological strategies, and that this is a crucially valuable step in imagining possible unities. But what would another political myth for socialist feminism look like? What kind of politics could embrace partial, contradictory, permanently enclosed constructions of personal and collective selves and still be faithful, effective, and ironically socialist feminist? So, quote unquote. As I've just quoted, Haraway asked, what would another political myth for socialist feminism look like? And in the following, I want to give a short breakdown of a potential answer to this. As the quote shows, her perspective was explicitly based on socialist feminism, which also coincided with her demand to adopt partial perspectives. This is reflected in the concept of situated knowledges that questions the validity of scientific objectivity and its alleged impartiality. She argued that under the guise of neutrality, it would hide a very specific position that is male, white, heterosexual, and human, and thus make this position appear universal or confer a claim of universal validity. Haraway's position was to acknowledge partial perspectives and embodiments of the subject to be able to create a specific feminist epistemology of transformative and particular knowledge. As a consequence, this would allow to analyze individual experiences as well as multifaceted mechanisms of inequality and oppression. In this respect, her references to Black feminism already anticipated intersectional aspects. But in terms of a social model, this approach could also sanction feminist perspectives in the analysis of societal disablement. Basically, she questioned the neutrality of terms and concepts that allegedly seemed to have originated in some kind of pre-discursive or pre-social value-free space. Therefore, the point of uniformity through domination was decisive because it derived from identity thinking. But Haraway believed that identity thinking that would not question its involvement in underlying entanglements would risk perpetuating the influence of hidden biases and power relations. In that respect, the theoretical concept of the cyborg was decisive because it represented a transgression of dividing practices into forms of classifying and identitarian thinking. However, it should be noted that this concept also faced criticism from disability studies because it painted as a one-dimensional positive picture of the potential reality of living with assistive aids, which often contradicted the material reality of disabled people and ignored its negative aspects or developments. In terms of socialist and Marxist feminism, Haraway criticized the biologization of feminist perspectives because she also challenged the ideological motivation behind biological or binary determinisms in general. The sex-gender binary was often used as a tool in feminist discourses to deconstruct the biological determinism of gender, but Haraway argued this could only lead to false conclusions because it would not question the political social history behind the development of this binary. As a consequence, this would not just reproduce further exclusions, but also not question where the distinction between sex and gender was coming from, and if it would also carry within a history of power relations and preconceived assumptions. For this reason, she was skeptical of the use of woman as an umbrella category in Marxist analysis because it would reproduce totalizing assumptions. Okay, and now I want to formulate some concluding thoughts on the presentation so far. Two major aspects relating to disability have emerged. Disability has a marginalized status in a capitalist system because disabled people's labor can only be exploited to a limited degree due to the performance requirements of the capitalist mode of production. Additionally, the ambiguity of disability alludes to push to essentialist definitions according to the demands of formal logic. It illustrates the tension between identifying and classifying thinking and the object disability, for example. In terms of the application of critical theory, this means the application of critical theory can enrich the concept of the social model and its materialist stance. Its undogmatic approach and critical distance to the traditional thinking leaves room for diverse lived realities beyond fixed categories and exploitability. But it also critically examines supposed certainties, such as the historical determinism of historical processes. Its basis is in Marxism, similar to the social model, but is also influenced by the history of ideas, and its findings stem from the analysis of the entanglement of the Enlightenment, instrumental reason, and economization. Donna Haraway also questions identitarian thinking and wants to uncover hidden biases in power structures. Through her demand to challenge determinism and engage in the political social background of terms and concepts, she wants to unfold underlying assumptions and offers the adoption of partial perspectives as a potential solution. Even if cyborg feminism is not always practical, in reality, due to the material constraints of disabled people's lives, its approach is analytically valuable because it can make the social model particularly compatible with a feminist or intersectional view of disability. So the combination of these approaches can address the critique of the social model because it opens the social model to new perspectives on diverse and lived realities in materialist analysis. So that's the end of my presentation today. Here's also a bit of selected literature that was important for this presentation. And yes, thank you very much for attending and listening today. Okay.
Thank you very much, Barbara. That was fantastic. So we were just going to the Q&A. Thank you again. I know that the tech problems must have made parts of tonight a bit of a logistical nightmare. So thank you so much for making all the efforts to stay with us. Ariana was just about to give a reflection on the talk and perhaps ask you a question. So I'm going to let Ariana take that away, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, of course. And thanks a lot for your patience for staying on with me today. And thanks, Ariana. I'd like to hear what you think about it.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't see you, but yeah, maybe I'm lost. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So, Barbara, are you here?
I'm here, yes.
Okay.
So I hope the video works. So.
Okay, that's okay. Sorry, I was confused. Yeah. Thanks so much, Barbara, for a wonderful presentation that I will certainly watch again just to to absorb it properly. It was really amazing. I think I have there are many points for that I really appreciated and I would like to reflect more upon. But I think if I had to pick one, my question is around your discussion of the economization and how the specific approach you take through the Frankfurt School allows us to put into conversation the social model with that specific focus of critique. So my question, and I suppose that is also quite it's exciting to I also really loved your discussion of non-identity in relation to that, to disability and economization. But my question is my question is how you see this concept of economization in relation to the non-identity that disability introducing into the Marxist analysis. Based on that, how do you see that critique as being embraced by either disabled people movements or disabled people working from a social model perspective, or disabled people maybe not acquainted or not really, or maybe not identifying with the social model and thinking, for example, people into other forms of disability justice theory or creep theory, whatever. So the question is how you see disabled people embracing that critique to discuss lived realities that you touched upon at the end, or and how you see, so the same point, how you see instead Marxists again embracing that critique of economization that is possible from the perspective that you come from, so engaging with both the social model and the Frankfurt School. Yeah, so basically, just to sum up, so I'm very sorry if it's so unclear, but my question is about how people, how you see people responding to and embracing the very powerful critique you put forward based on economization, your discussion of economization from a perspective that brings together social model and Frankfurt School. I hope it makes sense. Thanks so much again for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks,
Yes,
Ariana.
thank you very much for your question. Sorry.
Just very quickly, just because I'm worried about time, I'm going to suggest we do 2 questions at a time for you and then give you a chance to respond. Is that cool? Cool. So we've had a question in the chat from one of our comrades who I think might even be in Frankfurt, come to the hour. So they ask, firstly, whether you'd be able to explain whether there's any application of the non-identity concept to concepts of impairment and disability, whether the non-identity relationship holds there in any fruitful ways, and also whether you think the influence of psychoanalysis on the Frankfurt School might be relevant for applying critical theory concepts to disability.
Thanks a lot for your questions. So first I will try to respond to Ariana. And if I understand you correctly, then you want to ask how I think Marxists could embrace this critique, but also people who come from other perspectives, maybe from a disability perspective, not necessarily Marxist. And I personally think there's a lot of value still to social model, because there was this critique, as I mentioned in my presentation, that it might be a bit outdated, that it might be that the Marxist approaches might not be relevant today anymore. But I think there's actually a lot of still value to it, because I mean, material relations obviously play a big role in disabled people's life, but in all our lives in general. And I think we need to revive it. So in that respect, and I think when you also look at the material conditions, that a lot of people are very poor and live in difficult conditions. And it has a lot to do also with access, for example, to assistive technology, for example. So it's all related. And I'm trying to stop my thoughts here while I'm talking. Sorry, that's a bit confused. So what I want to say is that economization plays a big role in all our lives, but especially in disabled people's lives. So, and you can just point to everyday lives and how it affects economization in their personal lives. So I guess I find very relatable. But on the other side, I also understand this critique sometimes that traditional Marxist approaches they have left out intersectional perspectives. They came often from a patriarchal standpoint, and also that's one critique. Or there's another critique that what do I want to say? Sorry, that come from that they leave out. Oh yes, exactly. That's what I want to say. And this critique of the socialist feminisms, for example, that they often had these identitarian perspectives, as I mentioned, that they had a very specific point of view of women that wasn't questioned for at least for a very long time. I think it's a bit different now, and this woman that was often represented as white and middle class. So, and even if it was not spoken out directly, there was all this underlying thought, this is what a woman stands for. And in this way, I think non-identity can help to explain, for example, that a concept of woman is much more than this. There's always a remain that contradicts this. And that's where also Donna Haraway comes into play. So that's where I see the connections between them, that she also adds to this, that she says, oh, there are, for example, Black women who experience racism and also class issues as well. But there are also a lot of other connections, like disabled people are affected by gender-related issues, as, for example, disabled feminists have criticized. So you can relate it to all different kind of circumstances. And I think if you make these connections and make clear how it relates to these things, then at least from my perspective, you can introduce non-identity to different kinds of people. I mean, that's my personal perspective on it, but I also read some time on it, and of course it's easier because I can also can see that it's very theoretical. It might not always easy to connect, but when you break it down to this like everyday conditions, then there's a lot of it to it that can be connected, I would say. So, and I'm trying to reply to the other question, and I think it was about if it had been applied before non-identity. And when I did my research, I didn't find many examples of critical theory in general, but I want to mention the Center for Disability Studies in Hamburg that I also cited in my work. And they use the concept of non-identity to point to these new liberal conditions we live in, and that people, they lay bare the contradictions of this whole system, that we always have to function to perform, because people, they don't do that in that way. And so they show that the system doesn't really work for everyone. And it's not like, does not promote happiness for everyone as it often promises. So, and in that respect, it was applied by them. So they wanted to show that disability has some kind of friction with that. And I think the other question, I don't remember the last question. I'm sorry, there was something else, I think.
No, the last question was whether the influence of psychoanalysis on the Frankfurt School might have any relevance towards applying critical theory to concepts of disability or analyses of disability.
That's a good question. I haven't explored it that much, to be honest. I found some kind of criticism about psychoanalysis, that it was very patriarchal, which again came from Donna Haraway because she explored these issues. And I guess so that like the gender perspectives, they were very one-sided, this kind of thing. So in that way, if you want to have an intersectional approach, so I guess it could be difficult, or at least you have to discuss it a bit further. How can you apply it in a way that includes these perspectives as well? And yeah, and in a way, yeah, it's I would say I find it difficult at the moment because I haven't explored psychoanalysis this much on this side, and okay, are you still there?
We're still here, Barbara.
Oh, okay, so I wasn't sure at the moment, and I think where could be maybe fruitful if you want to look at the want to look at it in terms of social psychology, and how can it transfer to today's society, and what does the order of today's society mean for disability? What role has disability in that way? So I guess in that way it maybe could be made fruitful. So that's my first reaction to it. Yes.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So we have the Brummy Mafia next. So I'm going to take one question from Bob and then one question from Joanna. And then if you could respond to those, that would be fab. So Bob, take it away.
Okay. First of all, don't you think there is a contradiction? Because in your presentation, you said that people argue the social model is a tool and not a general theory of disability, which I agree is the case. However, isn't it time we actually stop talking about models, because models are fit? They have a issue that they are trying to deal with. And if we're looking at social relations, then they are not static, but they change with the struggle that is taking place. And that leads me on to argue that a lot of what you say is interesting, which is why I began to talk about eco-social approach toward disability, because it is about the different environments that we encounter that leads to social restrictions that we face. And I'll end my question by saying, and that raises the issue of how do you conceptualize the idea of a disabling barrier? Because I find the idea of barrier quite restrictive. Ironically, I think if we talk about social restrictions, that has a wider dynamic than talking about social barriers. That's it.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to take Joanna next. Can I just ask very quickly, Barbara, when you're responding to Joanna, are you able to hold your phone slightly lower? That's amazing. I just realized
Okay.
we couldn't see your lips, and if anyone was trying to lip read, they might struggle a little.
Of course.
Perfect.
Sorry.
No, I do exactly the same thing. Joanna, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Luke, and thank you, Barbara, for a fantastic presentation. You're doing so much necessary work. That's I'm really glad that you're doing the work that not many others have been focusing on, which is relating the social model to the Frankfurt School. And I was wondering, and I really like your understanding of or your proposal to understand disability as a non-identitarian term. And in relation to that, I was just wondering, how does the approach you're advocating for transform your definition of disability? How would you define disability, basically, in light of the insights you've shared with us today? And then secondly, I was curious if you've had the chance to basically apply the framework that you've developed to a particular case study, either via your PhD project or whether you intend to do so in future, and if so, what kind of area of social life would you want to focus on? And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I start with Joanna. And when I talk about disability, then I mainly almost refer to this understanding of the social model of disability. So that's where I'm coming from, basically. So that as the fundamental principles explained, that it points to the disablement through society, through social social order, and how are you disabled by external barriers. So and that's also how I mostly apply my understanding of it, and I hope it became clear in the presentation and not to mix up with anything else. And the second question, I haven't applied. It's mostly a theoretical work, but I guess it would be very interesting to do that. So I haven't had the chance yet to develop. I think it would actually be worth doing that to see how can you actually apply it and make it work maybe in practice, so that it's not just some kind of gray theory, but also it can actually do something in a case study. And it would be very interesting to do that. So and I guess it can be different areas where you can do this. So especially in the area of, I don't know, feminism or maybe queer feminism even. So I guess that would have some great overlaps. So. And then the first question from Bob, I'm not, can you please remind me what was the question again?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure. Yes.
Okay. What I was saying was, if the social model is a tool and not a theory, then how do you change it? Isn't it time we stop talking about it as a model and talk about it as an approach?
So basically, you mean how can we would it be time to turn the social model into a theory? So is that right?
Partly yes, but
Yes.
I think there's a halfway house because a model is a fixed question to be interrogated, and that is why I'll never be happy about talking about it as a model and a tool. I don't think the two are the same thing. So it's an approach. If we use it, it's an approach, not a model.
Yeah, that's a good question because I had the same discussion when I was doing my PhD. And I remember that one of my examiners, they criticized me for treating it as a theory. So, and they said it's a model, so therefore it cannot cover everything. And that this is like a misconception.
Oh, yeah.
Just give a few moments for Barbara's
To add some more theoretical perspective. And
Barbara,
yes.
you cut out for about 10 seconds.
Okay.
So we got to the point of there was a guy in your PhD, can't remember if it's supervision or exam, who was criticizing you, saying that this shouldn't be able to express everything. And you said, and I replied, and then the cliffhanger cut in.
Okay, then I tried to start from there. No, I had a discussion with that with my PhD, one of my PhD examiners, who criticized me for treating it as a theory. So, and he said, no, that's a wrong understanding of the social model. So and it cannot explain everything because it is just a model, it just points to mechanisms of exclusion, but it's not more. And so that made me realize that there are obviously very different perspectives and also contested perspectives on what the model is. And I guess, and I think my position would be you could maybe either accept it and say it's just a model or an approach, I think, as you called it. I hope I understood it correctly. Or you could also use it as an opportunity to maybe make it into a more in-depth theory. And maybe what I'm doing helps a bit with that, to add more perspectives and maybe to adapt it to other approaches that make it relatable to more people than it did before, maybe. So, but I think that would be something that would be developed, should be developed in more depth, of course. So, and It's also, I guess, the question, how do you separate theory from a model? So I guess you have to define that also very carefully, it seems to me. And there's, I think, some discussion about it. Is it a model or a theory? Or what exactly is the differentiation between it? Yes. Okay.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any more hands, so unless somebody jumps in very quickly with a hand or the chat, I will be forced to abuse my position as chair. All right, you asked for it. Hi, Barbara. Firstly, thank you again. The presentation was really interesting, really in depth. I have a couple of questions. One is actually almost the opposite of Bob's, which I know puts you in quite a difficult position. So firstly, I can completely see how one starts with the Frankfurt School and goes via Haraway and ends up with the claim of the social model that disability is imposed by contemporary social organization. There were other ways that happened as well. And I think the problem is not particularly that there wasn't, a worked out materialist approach. I think it was there were too many, right? So the way I see it, UPS had a very anti-reductivist materialist approach, which focused on the various circuits of governance within capital. So the commodity relationship, then followed by the relationship of state and parastate, then followed by basically what we might call everyday life analysis, right? And the interrelation of those three things. Oliver had one, which is just regimes need ideologies, ideologies have efficacy power, disability is an ideology, and you end up with this kind of discursive reductionism. And then if you start with a non-identity claim and pass that through the analysis of capital as a fixed entity which has certain effects on rational thought, with the Frankfurt School, you get another one which you can then pass through Haraway. So I guess the problem is not, is there a materialist legacy, but what priority would you give towards the materialism that you've chosen as compared to the other two? And then the second question is around the idea of reincorporating or incorporating feminist analyses into the meta theory of the social model. I guess what I'd like to do is put to you an argument that was put forward by the women members of UPS and see how you might respond to that, and whether you think this is compatible with your approach to this problem, or whether you think it throws up questions or itself needs to be critiqued. And the argument, when it was put to them that this stuff ignores things which are considered to be women's issues, they would or prioritize ones which are taken to be men's issues, particularly employment, transport, housing, so on and so forth. Their argument was that's a really conservative definition of what counts as issues for men or for women. It's coding certain very personal issues as female issues, and it's coding issues which actually affect men and women equally as being uniquely male. And the critique is to some degree, it has a rational kernel. Maybe there should be more attention paid to the personal world, although they had their misgivings around that. But that critique itself is not in the interest of women's liberation. It's simply in the interest of redividing the private public distinction, which has been inherent to women's oppression, into a supposedly liberatory project. And so from that standpoint, the claim would be, the argument, the critique that they would accept, I guess, would be along the lines of, has the strategy built off of these insights been carried out in such a way that it empowers women just as much as men, rather than, is there an ellipsis within this theoretical tradition where it's impossible to talk about women or women's liberation? Do those both make sense as questions?
I think so, yes. I'm just thinking about how to respond to it. Because I think there are several issues how we can look at it. Because I think first, you were asking about where do I posit the materialist side of it, and I think it's definitely very important because it's some kind of the underlying structure But this all builds on at least as long as we live in a capitalist society. And that's why I also chose this quote about critical theory, where they say the basic theory stays the same as long as the class relations and the basic underlying structures stay the same. So, and I guess it's very important to note, even if some forms, how it shows change over time, of course. I mean, society today looks different in society at the time of the Frankfurt School of Adorno and Horkheimer, of course. But I think the underlying class relations of exploitation, they're still quite similar. So the internal structure. So in that respect, I think it is very important. But then on the other side, and that's why I brought in like different approaches, is that this view can also like kind of hide that everyone, of course, is affected by this circumstances, this economic conditions, socioeconomic conditions. That's, I think, correct. But on the other side, it also hides the fact that people are affected by it in different ways. It shows in different forms. And then, as Haraway said, there's this kind of patriarchal view brought into it. And sometimes you can maybe overlook that there's different forms of exploitation that you're not aware of because you don't look at it, because it's not in your focus. So, and I think it's also, I think it's important to differentiate. So I think that's my point, that you need to have a view of the whole structure of it, but also see within the views, within this whole thing, where is it important to look at different forms and to see how are they affected. So I guess, I hope I'm making myself clear.
That's fine, thank you.
Like,
No, that's absolutely fine. So we only have 5 minutes left. Is there anyone who would like to give a very quick reaction or ask a very quick question to Barbara before the end? I will limit any contributions to being 2 minutes long. So it's a speak now or forever hold your peace situation, but I do urge you to speak now. God, I've put everybody off again, haven't I? Got a habit of doing that. Okay, in which case I would like to thank Barbara very, very much indeed for her time. We have one other question, again from one of the comrades at Inklusionsreferat. Another last point to make. In Germany, there is a regime where disabled people need to be part of a workforce without being paid. I think that's the end of the... the Behindertenwerkstatten. Barbara, is there anything in closing that you'd like to say about the Behindertenwerkstatten?
Yes, I mean, I heard about that disabled people, if they cannot work in there's differentiation between like the first labor market in Germany and then like the second labor market. And first labor market is where the non-disabled, the so-called normal people work. And then the Behindertenwerkstatt, these are workshops for disabled people who have get paid very little, only like, I don't know, some kind of pocket money kind of sum. Yeah. And this is a huge point of exploitations because, for example, companies, they buy their work, but they only have to pay little money for their labor. And so it's a huge point of critique about these workshops for disabled people. And so I think it's also where the materialist perspective comes in, because of course they're easier to exploit and for cheap money, and of course that's something that is being exploited as well. So it's part of this system, I think. So, and
wicked. Thank you very much. Okay, so everybody, many thanks to Barbara for her time and her effort this evening and for the fantastic presentation. We will be reconvening next month, where we'll be hearing from Kavana Ramaswamy. Please keep an eye on your email inboxes for the date and media link for that, which will probably be circulated within a couple of weeks. We have a handful of updates on calls for papers and calls for abstracts. Firstly, the submissions process for the next year of Marxism and Disability Network talks is now open. You should have received from me yesterday and from Joanna late last week a link to fill that out via Google form. You can also fill it out in the form of a Word document as well and send that over to us. The deadline is Halloween. I've been having a great time making spooky puns to encourage you all to submit. So the last one for now, if you don't take this opportunity, it will haunt you for all of next year. We also have a call for abstracts for a session run by the British Sociology Association. Joanna, would you like to give a very brief bit of background on that?
That is for the Political Studies Association conference in 2025 in April. Basically, the Marxist specialist group are asking for abstracts that focus on the intersection between Marxism and disability, in particular, because they would like to put a special, like a panel on this particular topic. So that's for the PSA conference that will be held face-to-face in Birmingham. And then secondly, we are also looking into organizing a joint event with the Marxism specialist group of the PSA next year online. So if you have any abstracts you would like to submit for that particular panel online, please send them to me so we can think about how to put together that event and what theme it could have. And we hope to also have PSA members submit abstracts as well and have a dialogue between the two groups.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanna. So with that, I will wish you all a very pleasant evening and a great rest of your week. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all in November. Take care. See you around. Cheers.